What is up, fam? It's your boy Paul P. Henny, and this is the One Day at a Time podcast. That's right, we are in this together, fam. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, leave a rating, and quite honestly, fam, if you could do me a favor and share some of this content, because you never know, somebody might be able to get something from what we're learning together. So today, I actually want to talk about a thought from my book, Slave No More, Conquering the Master Within. And that thought is simply this: your mind is like soil with seeds that have been planted throughout your life. I'm going to read that again for us, fam. Your mind is like soil with seeds that have been planted throughout the course of your life. Now, fam, as I think about that, quite honestly, it takes me back to, let's say, my senior year of high school. Now, some of us experienced something that we called Senior Skip Day. That's right, Senior Skip Day. Now, for me, that day was a little different because the guidance counselor at the time actually asked me and a couple other of my classmates to come into the school that day because the rising freshman class actually had their orientation that day. And she said, Paul, I know it's your senior skip day, but would you mind coming in and just sharing a few words with our incoming freshman class? So, you know what? The guidance counselor and the guidance department did so much for us while we were in school. So we said, sure, we'll come into the school and we'll say something to the rising freshman class. So fam, here I get up there, I see all of these, 13 and 14-year-old students, and they're in there, half of them are looking kind of nervous because they're in middle school, but they're transitioning into high school. And fam, I was trying to figure out what message could I share with them that would resonate, okay? And I remember this song. As a matter of fact, some of y'all might remember the song. It was called Wanksta. Wanksta by this guy named 50 Cent, right? And so what I did was I talked with them about the importance of doing your schoolwork. Stand focused so that you can accomplish whatever goals it is that you're looking to achieve. And then I said to them, you know what? If you don't focus on your schoolwork, you could be just like that guy in the 50 Cent song when he was like, dang, homie, in high school, you was the man, homie. And fam, right before I could even get to the part where he says, what happened to you? The whole crowd, all those 8th graders yelled out, what happened to you? And fam, I'll be honest, I was shocked, okay? And some of them may have actually said the actual word. That wasn't necessarily my goal. The whole point was to let them know that, hey, you need to do your schoolwork because you don't want to be the man in high school and then years later, it's like whatever happened to so-and-so. So fam, I remember coming off that stage and Miss Williams, who was like the director of the guidance department at that time, she said, Paul, that was pretty good. And she said, you might have a future in speaking. Fam, that was 22 years ago. 22, okay? And that seed that she planted, as a matter of fact, I believe that was the first time I had ever heard that from anybody. And 22 years later, here I am still speaking. But it started with a seed that Miss Williams planted a long time ago. Fast forward about 5 years, I'm working for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And around that time, we had this guy that came into town. His name was Ray Sidnor. Now Ray has spoken at our camp, at our summer camp in the prior summer. So my supervisor had this thing where he would always invite one of the dynamic speakers from camp. He would invite them to town and take them from school to school because he figured that their story may resonate with some of the students that we were serving and some of the schools that we were serving. So we take Ray to, him to Highland Springs, which is a school in the metro Richmond area. They're known for having a really good athletic program, whether it's basketball or football. They've won a number of state championships, right? So Ray's story was a really good story, okay? He played college basketball and football at the University of Wisconsin. He ended up playing in the NFL. He ended up playing for the Philadelphia Eagles. But part of his story was one of drugs and alcohol. And as a matter of fact, because of the drugs and alcohol, he ended up not being able to play in the Super Bowl, and I think it was the year of 1981 where the Eagles played the Raiders. So he has this story of how the drugs and alcohol deterred him from his path. But one thing I love about his story is it's very redemptive, to the point where he was able to come back and talk about all of the positive changes that happened over the course of his life. And he would go from school to school, telling his story, being an inspiration to the next generation. So my supervisor actually asked me to introduce Ray. And I'm like, you want me to introduce Ray? Sure, I'll gladly do it. And I go in there, and fam, it's an auditorium or a gymnasium filled with students. I mean, from top to bottom, it was filled in there. So I go in and I introduce Ray, and I engaged the crowd, quite honestly, better than what I thought that I was able to do. And he goes out there and he does his thing, and everybody's so engaged. Once he finishes, he comes to me and says, "Hey, the way you engage the crowd, I'll be honest with you, you might have a future in public speaking." And I was like, wow, really? Because you got to understand, fam, I had literally just watched him engage the crowd. And if you ever worked in a school, this was actually after lunch, when the students are actually very active. So it's not always ideal to do an assembly after lunch, because the students are very active. They've eaten, they've had a bunch of sugar, so on and so forth. But he found a way to engage the audience to the point where they were able to listen, not only listen to a story, but be really engaged and learn from some of the things that he was sharing. But once again, for me, he planted another seed. See, these were two good seeds planted, one by Miss Williams and one by Ray Sidnor. And one thing I really appreciate about it is that these seeds have produced fruit in my life. You see, you have good seeds and you have bad seeds. When you have those good seeds, what do? Fam, you water those seeds. You nourish those seeds with the end result of producing a harvest. You want to produce a good crop, so you water those seeds, you nourish those good seeds, and eventually you're able to harvest a good crop, a good harvest. Now, the reality is, some of us have had bad seeds planted over the course of our lives. Fam, I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with students, and I can think of students, well, I've asked, hey, has anybody ever told you that you're a champion? Now, the word may not be champion, but has anybody ever told you anything that's positive about yourself that you can hold on to? Maybe the word is champion, maybe it's something else, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've had students tell me, no, Mr. Henderson, no, nobody's ever told me that. As a matter of fact, you have so many who live with their grandma or their auntie. As my wife Kiera so eloquently put it, there is no easy route to being raised by your grandma, right? And then a really good friend of mine, Jason, he added on to that. He said it's a road paved with many tears. You see, the way I look at it is this. You see, sometimes people have said bad things to us that you can almost look at as a bad seed. But the reality is, sometimes it's not the bad things that have been said to us. It's the experiences that we faced over the course of our lives that become bad seeds that have been planted within us. I think about one of my favorite interviews that I conducted for my book, Slave No More, Conquering the Master Within. It was a lady named Reva Duggar, and I love her so much. At our old church, we actually called her Sister Reva, right? We called her Sister Reva. But one thing I love about about Reva is, not only was she just an amazing woman with an amazing story. It's actually really personal for me because when we needed childcare for our oldest child, when Kiera had our first baby boy, we didn't know who would keep him. We didn't know. We were like, okay, who's fit to keep our son? Who's fit and has the availability to keep our son while Kiera and I are at work? And she actually approached us. She was recently retired, and she actually approached us and said, you know what? That's my baby right there. When y'all can let me get my baby? She said something along those lines. And we were like, oh, this is working out perfectly, because we were going to ask you. And quite honestly, fam, we were a bit nervous about asking her at the time. So it took a load off of us, as new parents, that she actually approached us about helping us with our child. And over the course of years, our boys began to call her Nana. And to this day, when we travel from Detroit to Richmond, Virginia, our boys always spend at least one night with their Nana and with their Papa Joe. But around this time when I'm writing my book, she shares her story with me. And she talks about growing up in an area called Prince Edward County, Virginia. And around the time she was growing up, they actually shut the school system down, fam, because they refused to integrate. And she tells a story about how that school system was shut down for 5 years. And what they would do is they would open some sort of private school, private academy, for the white students to attend. But what about the black students that didn't have a school to attend? So for 5 years, from the time she was 7 years old up until the time that she was 12 years old, fam, she couldn't go to school. Now, her mom only had a 3rd grade education, and her dad only had a 6th grade education. So imagine her going back to school at 12 years old, being plopped back into school in the 7th grade, and you're just being told to survive. Once again, they put her in school in the 7th grade, but her mom only had a 3rd grade education, and her dad only had a 6th grade education. So how is she to survive when she's going to the 7th grade? Who can really help her with her schoolwork? That's a bad seed. Concurrently, she was dealing with the negative things that her father was saying to her at the time, telling her everything that she was not capable of doing. So one, she has her experiences, and then two, she has the negative things that her father was saying to her, right? So these are bad seeds that have been planted in her over the course of her life. So what ends up happening is it was hard for her family. It was hard for her, but eventually, persevering, she ends up graduating. She ends up graduating middle school. She ends up graduating high school. She decides to become a nurse. She saw somebody dressed in all white and said, you know what? I want to do what they do. She ends up getting into this nursing program about an hour and a half away from where she was in Richmond, Virginia. And when she gets into this program, she would tell me the story about so many times, whether it was a test or some sort of certification, and she would think about her past experiences. She would think about the things that her father said to her that were discouraging along the course of her life. Once again, those are bad seeds. Bad seeds that she had to deal with. But one thing I love about her story is she found a way to uproot those bad seeds. You see, fam, I like to look at bad seeds almost like a spark that can lead to a damaging fire, right? So what ended up happening over the course of time, there were women that were in her department that would encourage her, and they would say, Reva, you can do it. Reva, you can do it. Reva, you can do it. And every time they would tell her that she could do it, they were doing two things. If you look at the seeds, the bad seeds, they were actually helping to uproot those negative seeds that were being planted over the course of her life. If you want to look at it like the spark that's leading to a damaging flame, it was almost like they were splashing all kinds of water in order to put that fire out. So if you whether it's putting the fire out Or if you're uprooting the bad seeds, what do we have to do in order to create a good ground so that those good seeds can produce good fruit? Fam, you have to cultivate the ground. You have to cultivate it. You have to cultivate it. So over the course of time, the more positive things that they were speaking to her, the more life they were speaking to her, the more they were telling her, hey, Reva, you can do it. Reva, you can do it. The bad seeds were uprooted, and eventually that land, fam, was being cultivated and being processed and ready to receive the good seeds. All of a sudden, she was faced with a choice. Am I going to believe this bad seed over here? Or am I going to believe this overpowering good seed that these ladies in my life are sharing with me? And fam, what she did was she began to believe the good things that were said about her. She began to believe the ladies that were saying, Reva, you can do it. She began to believe that, fam, and those seeds began to be nourished, that they began to be watered, and guess what? Eventually, they produced fruit. So that test that she was taking to become an LPN, fam, guess what? She ended up passing it. But she passed it because those ladies not only put out that damaging fire, not only did they help to uproot that bad fruit that was there, they cultivated that land. They planted good seeds, and eventually they got a good fruit. Fam, I think about this. And I think about my life, and I want you to think about your life. The reality is all of us have good seeds and bad seeds that have been planted. What I want us to do is to make sure that we are properly watering and nourishing those good seeds. Because what I want to see for you, as I want to see for myself and my family as well, my individual family, all right? What I want to see is I want to see good fruit in all of our lives. But the reality is some of us, like Reva, like Sister Reva, if you will, we've had bad seeds that have been planted. And what I want you to do when you have those bad seeds planted, I want you to find a way to uproot those bad seeds. Because the reality is those bad seeds, eventually they produce bad fruit. And I don't want us to continue to fall susceptible to that bad fruit. So what we need to do is sometimes we have to figure out a way to change that environment. We need to change our environment. If there's an environment that's continuing to perpetuate the bad seeds that have been planted, we got to figure out a way to change that environment, right? You have to think about what is it that you're listening? What is it that you're listening to? Who is it that you're listening to? Are they perpetuating the bad seeds, or are they helping to uproot those bad seeds and help you turn the corner so that we can begin to experience the good fruit that God designed for our lives the entire time? Who are you listening to? Who are you around? Who are you allowing to influence you? These are things to this day, fam, that I think about, and I want you to think about. If you've had bad seeds planted over the course of your life, I want to let you know, I'm here to encourage you today that it's not the end. We can uproot those bad seeds. We can uproot that bad fruit. We can cultivate the land, and within the right environment, we can plant good seeds and eventually produce good fruit. Once again, you get the good seeds, you water them, you nourish them. And how do we water and nourish them? With our community, being in the right community, being in the right environment, like the Facebook group that I've mentioned before. I want you in there because we want that to be a place. We desire that to be a place where we're encouraging each other to produce good fruit in whatever field you're in. Whether you're in education, whether you're in business, whether you're in the military, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a coach, I want to see your life producing good fruit. And fam, I want you to remember, we are in this together, okay? We're going to continue to plant good seeds. We're going to continue to water those good seeds. We're going to continue to nourish those good seeds. and eventually we're going to get a good fruit. And how do we do it? Remember, we are in this together. We're going to continue to learn together. We're going to continue to grow together. And we are going to continue to get better one day at a time. You got this.